Now that we got everything unpacked, let's get to the exciting part. This is part 2, Y-axis assembly. Here I'm taking the aluminum extrusions and I'm screwing them to the aluminum frame. I'm using a 3mm hex driver out of my workshop that I use for my RC trucks. Anybody who's ever worked with RC trucks knows that there's a lot of teardowns involved, and having these hex drivers definitely helps in those teardowns. For the amount of screws that we're going to be putting into this assembly, the hex driver for sure is way more comfortable and efficient than the hex keys that come with the kit. I had considered using the power driver here as well, but I have a better feel for the tightness of the screws when I'm using the hex driver. I feel this is important because we will be screwing into plastic parts, and if you over tighten those screws, I feel that there's a good chance that you could end up damaging those plastic parts. Once I got every screw tightened as far as I can get it with the hex driver, I follow up with another hex wrench that I have from my workshop. It's a little bit beefier for the tightness that we're heading to, but towards the end there I'm thinking, oh, what the heck, I'm just going to use the hex keys out of the kit to just kind of get the final tightening done here. So the one thing we want to make sure is we just don't over tighten these screws either. I mean, obviously we're working with aluminum, and getting them too tight could easily strip the threads. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is install the front plate. We're going to put in all the screws, but leave them somewhat loose and tighten them a little bit later. So before I install the rear plate, I need to determine which power supply I have. Here I can see that the power supply mounts from the side of the extrusion, so I will slide the nuts for the power supply on the side as opposed to the top. Now I'm going to go ahead and install the rear plate, again installing all 8 screws but not tightening them completely. I'm just going over all the screws one last time on the rear plate with the hex driver. Just going to snug them up as tightly as I can get them. I'm going to follow through on the front side and do the same with all the 8 screws there as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is take the large hex wrench, and we're going to do the final tightening of all the screws. The important thing here is to keep the frame as flat as possible while you're doing the tightening. If you don't do this, then you could end up skewing the frame, and then you just end up having to do this process all over again. Now we'll just install the rubber feet, and once we've got all 4 of them installed, I'm just going to check it for flatness, and it checks okay. Next up, we're going to assemble the Y-rod holders. Here we're going to take the M3S nuts, and we're going to stick them into the slots. I'm trying different methods here to try and get these into the slots, and I'm feeling like if I just cleaned the slots with a hobby knife, I wouldn't need all these extra tools. It's the middle of the night, kind of wanted to get this done, so the vise seemed to be working for me, and I decided to continue with this path. The funny thing is, I went down to the workshop to get the vise when I could have just grabbed the hobby knife, but as part of human nature, you get stuck on one path and you don't want to deviate, so oh well. And yet, I even had time to go grab a set of channel locks to help me press the nuts into the slots. Again, that was kind of working for me too, so I thought, oh, what the heck. I just listened to Joseph in his manual, cleaning the slots, all these unnecessary tools would not have been needed. Now that I've got the Y rod holders fully assembled, I'm going to attach them to the frame. Starting with the front side, I'm just going to screw them in place, but I'm not going to fully tighten them just yet. Incidentally, I've now switched over to a 2.5mm hex driver. Now I'm just going to flip the frame around and install the Y-rod holders on the back side. And again, just going to put the screws in but not fully tighten them. Next up, we're going to prepare the Y-belt idler assembly. I'm just going to grab all the pieces. First thing we're going to do is push the nuts into their slots. Next, we're going to find the location for the nylock, and we'll press that in place. Next, we're going to insert the pulley into the holder. Doesn't look like it's going to matter which way it goes. Once it's in, insert the M3x18 screw, tighten it up, make sure you don't get it too tight so that the pulley can still spin. Locate the dot on the assembly. This will indicate the top of the assembly when you go to install it on the front plate. Next up, we're going to assemble the Y-axis motor to the motor holder. Start by inserting the two nuts into the holder. Now figure out the alignment between the motor and the holder, and once you've got that figured out, install the two screws. Okay, now that you have it assembled, let's attach it to the rear plate. Just ensure the orientation of the motor is correct, and go ahead and put the two screws in. Next up, we're going to assemble the Y carriage. The manual says the carriage is symmetrical, so it doesn't appear to have a top or a bottom. So we'll just pick a side and start installing the bearing. Yeah, so I also have a wrench from my RC truck tools that I'm going to use to tighten down these nylocks. So we're just going to snug the nylocks up to the frame. We're not going to over excessively tighten the nuts, otherwise we could deform and damage the bearings. Once this is done, let's locate the mid-size rods and we'll carefully slide those to the bearings. And to be careful with this too, apparently you can pop the bearings out. I didn't run into this problem. With the frame facing forward, let's flip the carriage around so the two bearings are on the left side, and let's snap those into the holders. Next we're going to take some tie wraps and we're going to fasten the rods down to the holder. Not sure if you noticed, I didn't tighten the bearings down completely. They are still a bit loose, thinking that maybe I'll do this a little bit later. In hindsight, I'm thinking just follow the instructions and tighten them down now. We're going to be making the final adjustment of the rod holders set to the frame. This is why those bearings should be tightened to the carriage before we make this adjustment. So to make this adjustment, we're going to slide the carriage all the way to the end, which will set the distance of the rods to each other, and then we're going to go ahead and tighten that down. Once done, we're going to flip it around and do the same on the rear. Slide the carriage all the way to the back, set the distance between the two rods, and then tighten them down. If everything is set properly, the carriage should slide freely. Next, we're going to install a pulley on the motor. We're going to put the grub screw against the flat spot on the shaft. Just make sure the pulley is not up against the motor so it's not binding. Next up is the Y belt assembly, so we're just going to gather all the parts for it. So first up, we're going to install all the nuts into these assemblies. Next, we're going to attach the Y belt to the Y belt holder. Now we're going to attach it to the underside of the carriage, feed the belt through to the motor, and then back over to the front pulley, and then attach the end of the belt to the belt tensioner holder. Now attach the belt tensioner to the undercarriage. The screw shouldn't be tightened completely, as the tensioner needs to slide freely. Insert the 3x30 screw through the tensioner holder and screw it until it engages with the belt holder. This screw will be the mechanism to tightening the belt. We're going to adjust the belt tension properly by jamming the motor pulley with a hex key and pushing the carriage up against it. We expect the teeth in the belt to skip over the pulley at this point, and we'll make adjustments to the tension and repeat until the teeth no longer skip. Once we have the proper adjustment on the belt, we're going to flip it over and tighten down the tensioner holder so it doesn't move. Because of my dumbass move, I'm now tightening the bearings down to the carriage, but lucky for me, it all worked out.